Welcome to the 2018 Industry Forum. My name is Ellen Onstad. I work for Dodge Data and Analytics, and I'm the Portland chapter president this year. The schedule for this evening includes the 5x10's that'll get started shortly, and then speed education. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this evening, especially our event sponsor, Interior Technologies. And a huge thank you goes out to the Industry Forum Committee. If they could stand or raise their hand, thank you to this hard-working committee for putting on this evening. And thank you again to our sponsors. There'll be time for mingling after the speed education sessions. Information on our upcoming CSI programs on the second Tuesday and information about membership into CSI is outside the double doors on the table. And last but by no means least, thank you for joining us this evening for the 2018 Industry Forum.
Okay, hello, I'm Alexander. I will guide you through the 5x10's tonight. Welcome. Now the first part of our program, the 5x10 speakers. We have a really cool lineup tonight, and as always it presents some of our amazing local talent, but it also speaks to the variety of participants that are here tonight, and participants in the building industry, and also people that the Portland CSI chapter is trying to bring together in one room so that we can all talk to each other. Unfortunately, we're going to be a 4x10 tonight, not a 5x10, because our first speaker, Graham, had a family emergency and is not able to participate, which is sad, but we can move on. So our first speaker will be Rosemary. Rosemary Hill is in her final year of the Master's PSU Graduate School of Architecture, where she is also a teaching assistant for the School of Architecture's research-based design initiative. She has worked in the environmental, sustainability, and construction industries in New York and Portland. This experience fueled her passion and appreciation for environmental design, craftsmanship, and design build. She's currently working on a prototype for affordable accessory dwelling unit as part of PSU's Institute for Sustainable Solutions Backyard Homes Initiative. I don't know why PSU always has these really long titles of things, but there seems to be a story there. Rosemary also has a bachelor's in history from Reed College, so please help me welcome Rosemary.
Thank you. In this image, an empty field in Northeast Portland is rendered in color, while in the distance, the city center is rocked by a massive earthquake. This image is a simultaneous forecasting of our current state of preparation for the coming Cascadia earthquake and an opportunity to imagine an alternative future. In this talk, I will make the case that alternative future needs to begin today on this site. I will propose a design and construction of a building center and research studio for the development of seismic culture in Portland. Seismic culture is the incorporation of a region's seismic risk into everyday cultural practices that equip a population for responding to and recovering from a seismic event. Seismic culture creates awareness through narratives and activities that translate understandings of risk into opportunities for action. They build community ties through collective planning and preparation. They incorporate redundancies in infrastructure and invest in earthquake-resilient buildings. They acknowledge damage will occur and are prepared to rebuild. Our city was built without knowledge of the region's geological condition, and as a result, much of our building stock and infrastructure is highly vulnerable. The extent of the damage, as the map demonstrates, is unknowable and impossible to comprehend. Portland is in desperate need of a seismic culture to translate this knowledge of risk into action. I know this is very uplifting. FEMA has projected Portland slated to lose a third of its population, suffer $32 billion in damages, and not regain utility services for 3 to 6 months. 75% of businesses will fail within the first year. This map shows the areas that will be most impacted by the earthquake, with red indicating where soils will liquefy, and blue showing where shaking will be most violent. Recent disasters like Katrina, Sandy, and Harvey have demonstrated post-disaster rebuilding is a long and arduous process and exposed fundamental issues with how government aid is structured and distributed, how building code is driven by liability and not longevity, and how property insurance and the post-disaster building economy encourages communities to rebuild quickly instead of building differently. These systemic issues reach far beyond architecture, but architects and builders engage every day in manifesting the values that support their continuation. If we are going to build a seismic culture, where do we start? To look for answers, I investigated vernacular architecture and building practices in other seismic regions around the globe. I studied stone and timber frame construction in Japan, northern India, southern Europe, to understand their tectonic principles. These elements will form the basis of my design for the Seismic Building Center and Research Studio. During this process, I also discovered the importance of the act of building and its connection to forming a seismic community, one that engages in sharing risk and collective participation. The vernacular method of design and construction does not draw a distinction between design, engineering, material science, and construction in the way that Western contemporary practices do. Vernacular design requires an intimate understanding of material, climate, and structure, and this knowledge is transmitted not through drawings, but through the act of building itself. The program I am proposing incorporates this practice into the design process and by embedding spaces for design collaboration within the workspaces of builders, material scientists, and craftspeople. As part of my research process, I used model building to practice the vernacular technique of learning through making. This is a Kathkunthi architecture of Uttar Pradesh in northern India. In this study, I learned design fundamentals for a mortarless construction technique. It uses alternate stacking and non-continuous material to dissipate seismic waves. I thought that was pretty cool. The weight of the structure and the symmetry of the building give it stability, while the nested wooden joints provide flexibility. I was fascinated by this approach to creating stability in a building through flexibility instead of rigidity. These examples were inspirational, but the question remains, how do we prepare here in Portland? These tenets of vernacular practice are present in our contemporary building culture, but they are fragmented, existing in local initiatives, private practice, trade organizations, and university research centers. In my proposal for a seismic building center, these tenets of vernacular building culture will be brought together under one roof. This drawing shows how the program of the building center unfolds over time. Work would begin immediately to develop neighborhood resilience and prepare for hosting emergency response after the earthquake. The initial phase of construction focuses on strengthening relationships within the building community and encouraging community participation. The second phase engages in neighborhood improvements and retrofits and new construction. In the third, future earthquake phase, operations of secondary structures will shift to host emergency response efforts. This early sketch shows the building center in relationship to the site. The production and research studios are organized around a central courtyard that will be the site of material staging, small-scale building, demonstrations, and workshops. The courtyard will be used by building and crafts professionals to produce prototypes, conduct material research, and mock-up assemblies. It will also host workshops and courses for non-professionals. In this way, the courtyard provides opportunities for collaboration. The building is designed with open-air workspaces facing the courtyard, shop spaces in the middle, and a more conditioned workspace in the back. Each material specialization will have its own studio, and each studio will occupy a bay of the building anchored by a structural core. The framework for each core will be uniform, but the assembly and surface treatment will be designed with the studio's craftspeople and specialists to show the use of that material in seismic design. These drawings show how the program of the building will be spatially organized and how it will be built over time. The building center is in blue, and the campus will expand to include the buildings in red, a community hall, an extensive material and mock-up library, and additional storage. When the earthquake hits, the red buildings will be designated to host emergency response efforts, while the blue buildings will facilitate building and repair. The first project of the building center will concentrate on putting down roots in the community and the site itself. To do this, the building school will design and construct emergency shelter frames that will be staked throughout the park. The tent columns are designed to be taken apart and used in the park as furniture. The chairs are built from dimensional lumber scrap and laminated. 4 chairs stacked to create a column that will be erected in an emergency or used by the community to provide shelter for events. The design incorporates the tenets of vernacular architecture: sourcing, collaboration, building community, and refinement over time, and uses seismic design principles of movement, symmetry, and stacking. The chairs become the sites of everyday conversations, reflection, learning, and play, transforming the emergency shelter into a public amenity. The chairs will be produced continuously by the Building Center as an entry-level carpentry project, immediately connecting new participants with the larger community through an act of making and contribution. This project encapsulates the principles of the seismic building culture by embedding a common understanding of risk in cultural practices and incorporating seismic design principles into architectural form. In the Building Center, each studio will be a site for sourcing, collaboration, building, and research. This is an example of a study that would take place in the joinery studio. These joints investigate how glue lamination can be used to greatly reduce the production time of traditional Japanese joinery methods. The goal of the research is to explore a marriage of tech and craft that could take advantage of smaller cuts of lumber and be used to recycle damaged homes. The color highlights the lamination of the material, but could also call attention to where the material needs to be stronger or provide more flex. The drawings and mock-ups of this would become resources for architects and builders and would be open to the public as a building resource library. In conclusion, I would like to circle back to an early drawing I made while thinking about creating the conditions for building the city as an active city building. Seismic culture requires civic space that is productive, not just passive or consumptive. The Building Center provides space for engagement with neighbors and experts in material science and craft that is based in making, problem solving, and collective envisioning of a future. In this space, building culture is recontextualized as part of the community building process. Thank you.
It was beautiful work. Thank you for sharing that, and so important. So if you see some of Rosemary's professors, this is the moment to put in a good word for her. Our next speaker, Alex, discovered his excitement for visualization while attending architecture school at PSU, where he often found himself looking forward when he could start producing renderings, often staying late to learn new software and improving his rendering skills. His big plan on the visualization team at Ankara Moysen was to continue doing renderings until he got tired of it and then switch over to become an architect. Well, that day never came, which is good for us. He left his job and founded Atmosfera, his firm, just under 2 years ago. To this day, his passion is as strong as ever, and I'm excited for the future of visualization, having seen what he can do. He's also an avid climber and skier and escapes into the mountains whenever possible. I'm really glad, however, that he's here with us tonight, so help me welcome Alex.
Thank you, Alexander. Over the past few years that I've been a full-time visualization artist, I've discovered a lot about storytelling. This is by no means close to an exhaustive list. It's just a collection of my thoughts, what I've found to be most important when producing a rendering. I'll also share some of the ways that I push myself creatively and draw inspiration. Similar to photography, finding the correct composition is vital to creating a strong rendering. It's the foundation that all other elements get built onto, and no amount of render setting adjustment or lighting tricks or Photoshop layers can make up for a dull composition. Stronger images have a focal point, but renderings also need to illustrate a lot of different design elements. These two goals often oppose each other and create a point of tension. Finding the balance between them, what to show and what to focus on, is certainly a challenge I face. You can't do everything. When you choose one image, it'll take away time from the others. So renderings need to be carefully selected well in advance to beginning production. To ensure a rendering is going to have a solid concept, I start every project with quick sketching exercises. These are a selection of the sketches produced for a feasibility study with GBD architects. The focus of this stage is to explore different compositions, lighting conditions, the overall mood and concept. The more sketches that I can produce in this phase, the better. I'll explore new angles to find a worthwhile concept. It could be a particular reflection, some cool shadow lines, or an interesting composition. Any exciting moment that I think might be worth developing further. From a very early stage, you can get a feel for what the final rendering would be if you developed one of the sketches into a full rendering. This overall aerial view illustrates the sketching process very well. Before I was brought on, a drone photographer had taken a series of photos of the site. They were done early in the process, and so they were a bit of a guess. The photos didn't necessarily have much creative direction. When I started adding in massing blocks, which you can sort of see, things just didn't quite feel right. Either the lighting didn't make for interesting reflections, it didn't accentuate the lines very well, the angle of the camera didn't compose the massing nicely. We were trying to show the story of the project's life in the greater city of Portland, and nothing was quite getting us there. So these are two of the photos that were originally taken. I love the lighting in the image on the right, but the composition overemphasized the height of the buildings. The angle on the left was better, but the lighting didn't make for a nice image, and it didn't give a good understanding of the geometry. It just looked a little bit flat. And so I put together a sketch. You can very quickly collage together from Google Earth and any other photos and loosely brush in extra light and shadows. If you look closely at the scale of things are totally wrong. The city block grid is crooked. But what matters most in these early stages is the gut feeling when you first look at the image and what that response is. Because of this sketch, I was able to demonstrate it was worthwhile, worth the time and money, to send the drone photographer back out to the site. But this time I could determine the exact location and the time of day that we needed the photos to be taken at. And so when you jump to the final rendering, you can see there's a direct connection to the sketch. All the details got worked out, the design developed, and everything aligns properly now. But the overall feeling was set early in the process. By making sure that I have a solid concept for an image at the beginning, I can focus during main production instead of having to concurrently develop a mood and story, wondering if it'll even work out at all. So here's another example of what an early sketch might look like from the same project. It's quite rough, but the bones of the final image are all there. Another thing to note is that the sketch doesn't have to be a direct path to the end. They do develop along the way, and it's important for me to not be afraid of experimenting if things aren't quite progressing how I want. So when you jump to the final rendering, it's not as direct of a line to the aerial view, but the sketching was still an important component, and it laid the groundwork for what would ultimately become the final rendering. So I think a lot of people intuitively understand this, but the selection of entourage can be one of the biggest assets when telling a specific story. Our eyes are naturally drawn to other people. If the entourage doesn't fit right, whether it's not the right kind of clothing, if the lighting doesn't match, or if the shadows don't properly ground them, it can very quickly betray an otherwise good image and make it feel kitschy. So this rendering was for a women's and children's homeless center. We wanted to show the story of the kids having a chance to live and play freely while the mothers could keep a close watch on their children. The residents of this project would, of course, come from very rough backgrounds, and so the space I was illustrating would carry a lot of emotion. The entourage choices were of particular importance for this one because the rendering itself is otherwise quite simple. A large portion of the image is an open grass field. If we remove the entourage, it loses emotion. So the rest of the image is the same. Without the people, it now feels sterile. There isn't a strong focal point for your eye to latch onto. It hits all the same points from a technical level. The grass looks the same, the wood textures are the same, the lighting and shadows are still balanced. There isn't anything to signify the story that we were telling. Not every rendering relies on the entourage this much, but it is a powerful tool in every one. People are something you can instantly connect to on a subconscious level. So I think a lot about the first moment when you look at a rendering and what the initial reaction is going to be. The strongest renderings instantly spark something. This is certainly not the most nuanced or subtle selection of entourage. It's a bunch of hip young adults hanging out at the bar. But it's easy to imagine how the space would read differently if it had people in business suits or outdated entourage that look like they're from the 90s or people dressed for a black tie event. Entourage doesn't control 100% of an image, but you can nudge the mood in any direction based off the people you choose to show. So I try to look outside of architectural renderings to get inspiration whenever possible. The more inspirational and reference imagery I can gather from the real world, the better my virtual world images will turn out. Architectural photography is naturally a great source of inspiration, and it's an excellent way to root myself in reality. In 3D, it's super easy to hide geometry or push lighting too far into a space or stretch the field of view too much. But when you do this to a rendering, it doesn't feel quite right. Your brain sort of intuitively knows that something's a little bit off. So I find it best to start with the natural world and build an image from there. It's not to say that I'm afraid to push boundaries a little bit to explore something new. One of the greatest advantages of CGI over photography is total creative freedom. But I try to balance the 3D world with reality to make an image that feels right, not necessarily be right. I also practice my own photography as a hobby. As Alexander mentioned earlier, I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love to climb, hike, and ski, and I try to spend as much time outside as I can. There are a lot of parallels to photographing these experiences and architectural visualization. They're just in vastly different worlds. In both, I'm trying to capture emotional moments. By translating these moments from direct personal experience into a photograph, it hones my ability to identify and illustrate the moments in architecture. Whether it's the edge of a building or the edge of a rock, the same creative ideas apply. I'm identifying a focal point in both and building a story around it. Catching the right light can make the difference between a quick snapshot and a photograph that tells a story. The more time I spend capturing the real world, the better my understanding when I go back into 3D. And then I can explore with the total creative freedom that 3D affords, but still keep the final image feeling natural. As software and hardware get better and faster, more of the busy work or time waiting for the computer gets removed. Render times get shorter. Sometimes things can render in real time now. Things are getting a lot more efficient. And all of these changes mean that I get to spend more of my time on the fun stuff, the creative storytelling, rather than wrangling and fighting software all day. I'm very excited for what the future holds in visualization. I'm able to focus more on the creative aspects, like what I talked about today, and that's going to translate into better imagery in every project. I can take on larger, more ambitious projects with a bigger scale without being limited by the SketchUp or the computer or render times or whatever. The balance of my responsibilities will shift more into exploration than production. And I feel like I've only just scratched the surface and have a lot more to try even still, which sounds great to me because what I truly enjoy most in my work is to tell a story. Thank you.
What drew me to Alex's work is the color of the light. And you should definitely all check out his website at Atmosphera and look at the other renderings that he has done. And speaking about his website, in your programs, which you could have picked up in the front, there's a line card of all the 5x10 speakers. So if you want to follow up, ask questions, hire Alex, this is the place to go. So before I continue, I want to do a quick shout out to our awesome videographer, Frank, who is back there. He has been doing this for us for 5 years. He documents the whole show, and if you would like to revisit today's event, or today's presentations, it will be up shortly on the Portland CSI YouTube channel. When Frank is not doing this, He works in a wood shop behind his house, which is bigger than my house. But it's absolutely amazing. He is GSD trained. He is a masterful renderer himself and documents his craft. Very interestingly, you should check it out on one of the most fascinating websites you can visit. It's called Frank Makes. And I mean, one of the recent things he has done, he has built a Death Star out of, like Star Wars, right? Death Star. Out of wood. It's about this thing, and it's absolutely gorgeous. You should check it out. You can see how it all comes together. So Frank, back there, good job. Our next speaker, Greg, is a journeyman machinist by trade, a mechanical engineer by degree, a college instructor by occupation, and a mad scientist by nature. He once gave a lecture on continuous improvement in his manufacturing processes class and related it to the Japanese word kaizen. The next week, one of his students, who was clearly moved by his lecture, came to class and proudly showed off his new chest tattoo, which sure enough spelled out kaizen in kanji. So please help me welcome Greg.
Check out the laser. Nice. Welcome. My name's Greg Meyer. I spent the first 10 years of my professional career making things also, like a number of our guest speakers earlier. I worked at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center as a machinist building atom smasher parts. Went on from there for the next 20 years working for Hewlett-Packard Company, also making things, but on a much bigger, more expensive scale, big, large corporate computer systems. Then in 2010, decided to do a career pivot, thought it was time to shift and maybe get back to the community, all the things that I had learned in the past 30 years of designing and making things. So I started working for Portland Community College as a full-time engineering instructor. I quickly got hooked on this notion of digital fabrication, including 3D printers and lasers and computer-controlled machining equipment, and got into this whole maker movement. And we see up here Maker Labs 2.0. It's important to note that the 2.0 is, we're not there yet, but that's where we're actually heading. And that's kind of the plot of the presentation here tonight. So with that, I'll continue on. My ultimate goal, kind of jumping to the middle stage of the maker movement here, was to build the largest possible maker lab in the Pacific Northwest. And in the end, I think we actually did that. We have over 3D printers, or 30 3D printers, get my right laser button here, 25 digital vinyl cutters, several CNC routers, sewing machines and plastic injection molding, just lots and lots of cool stuff, big work surfaces. And all of this was strategically located right next to the back door of our school machine shop, which had the latest manufacturing equipment, computer-controlled machining centers, et cetera. So I felt like this was like the end game of all the work that I had done. This was the work after about 4 years, and now I'm going to kind of step back in time to the beginning, right after this next slide. And the next slide shows kind of a close-up of our 3D printer farm. We've got, I think, about 25 3D printers right here in this one area. And really, I think the goal was achieved, but the mission of creating the next generation of makers wasn't realized because we didn't have the staff, we didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't really have all of the surrounding accoutrements, if you would. We just had space and we had equipment. And you can see here it sits empty a good percentage of the time, even today. So kind of stepping back, I'm going to walk through from the beginning how we got from where we were in 2012 to here where we are in 2017 and 18. So when we first started building 3D printers and maker labs, a lot of the students. I couldn't wait to, 3D print an Eiffel Tower. And it was cool and fun, but that was not achieving the mission of actually turning them into designers and makers. And what we really wanted to do was get my little laser break, something inspiring and empowering. And as an instructor, I feel like those are really my two main jobs, is to inspire the students and give them the tools to act on those inspirations. And in the image that you see here, this is Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard standing in front of the infamous HP garage in Silicon Valley. That's noted as the birthplace of Silicon Valley. It's actually a national historic monument. So that really is the beginning and what my vision of where we want to head is. Maker Lab 0.1 started in 2012. I got funding from my dean to build a little portable makerspace on a cart. I had a 3D printer, had a battery backup system so I could roll it into the classroom, roll it over to the library, over to the student union. And it was super popular, and everybody wanted more 3D printers and more lasers. And so I approached the campus president at the time, who was quite visionary, and I said, hey, you've got this 1,600 square feet of unused space over in our old heating plant. Can we turn that into a maker space or a maker lab? And she said, sure, but give me some kind of a story, what you're going to do with it, what it was going to look like over the next 5 years. And so I quickly cobbled together kind of a little storyboard proposal, gaining on the momentum. And it's actually pretty fun. Now that we're in 2018, I go back and I actually look through all of these, and it's like, we accomplished a lot of that, and I never even pulled that out of a drawer until about, maybe 3 weeks ago. So she gave us our approval. That went on to move forward, and we built Maker Lab 1.0. This was about 1,500 square feet or so. There's actually 2 rooms side by side. This is kind of the main open fabrication room. We had just dozens and dozens of student tours through there. We affiliated it with lab classrooms. On the far side, through this door over here, was a couple of meeting rooms, student lounge area, and a little kitchenette area. So that was really super, just everybody wanted to be there. We were on the PCC main splash page. It seemed like every month about a new adventure. We had students coming in. We did 3D printing of prosthetics hands. It was just great fun, but it was like this all the time. It was not big enough still. So I had actually my eyes set on this space up here, which sat underneath our automotive shop, and it was sat like that most of the time. It was almost always unused. They would not give it up, though. And one day, the dean that oversaw that space took a job at the state, and so I swooped in. I became dean only because it came with that space, and I wanted that space. So we went from here to here in a matter of about 3 months of rapid design. This is kind of our inaugural event. We had something on the order of 100 high school students going through a 4-week program where they earned 7 college credits in digital design and manufacturing. So I used the motto up there, grow fast or die slow. And so it really was kind of like, full-blown, grow as much as we can while we have the momentum behind us. Yet, over the course of the past 5 years, and countless tours and workshops and engineering classes, I really can't point to maybe 1 or 2 cases where I felt like it made a difference. I can think of one of my students who went through this process, learned how to use 3D printings, and she became a production manager of a 3D printing shop in McMinnville. But other than one or two cases here and there, it was really just like an awesome camp facility where they would go and they would have a great experience, but nothing really, I didn't notice any more students coming into engineering. I wasn't getting any more people of color into engineering. I wasn't getting any more women into engineering. It was just like a really cool, fun place, and I was not achieving what I had hoped to through this whole process. Everything just hit this brick wall and fell down. So it was time to really step back and reflect and ask myself, well, what is it that we as designers and makers, how do we get to where we are today? And so through that process, I started reflecting on that. And, we too, a lot of us, started out in a garage. We were talking about the workshop and the wood shop. But we had more stuff as kids. We had tools that were accessible. We had scraps of materials, nuts, bolts, glue to stick stuff together. We had outdoor space to test out our creation. We had a dog that licked our wounds when we cut our hand with the saw. It was really, there was very little oversight and lots of space for creativity. And I feel like that's what was missing out of this process. And so this last slide really is, if Maker Labs 2.0, where would we go to actually hit that mark? And a couple of the slides, or a couple of points, has to be student run. You can't run it without the students. It's by the students, for the students. You can't afford it unless they're actually running it. The tools have to be out. They have to be freely available. We need to have store materials where they can actually buy wood scraps. We have to have a semi-organized junk room where stuff is partially assembled. If you want a motor or you need some wiring or gears, you can go scrounge. We need to have inspiring space and guest speakers come in. The idea here is to actually have a maker in residence to come in and actually do workshops. You can have competition. Georgia Tech has an extremely large Maker Lab, and it's all run off of student fees. And then, of course, I've got the dog in there. My dream was to hire somebody that was already like a canine companion training dog, so we could get the dog in the shop, because everybody likes a shop dog, right? And then, last and not least, getting school certifications is a long and arduous process, but you can get industry certifications anywhere from 2-day certifications to 4-week certifications, and they carry just as much weight in terms of going out and getting a job. So that's kind of where we're headed, and if I stay in this game long enough, where we'll be at in a year or so. Thank you.
That was so cool. So now don't all run out and get tattoos right now, okay? So it's good. We have one more speaker. Jeff Schnabel, our last speaker, is an associate professor in the School of Architecture at PSU. His primary area of research is the design of public space at night. He is co-founder of the Portland Winter Light Festival, which just happened, serves on the board of the Willamette Light Brigade, and is a member of the newly formed Nighttime Design Institute in New York City. Jeff is also a longtime collector of antique marbles, a fascination which I personally share. So please help me welcome Jeff.
Thank you. Well, it really is nice to be in front of you, and I fully realize that my presentation is currently between you and happy hour. So, I'll be brief. This is going to be completely an opinion piece for the next 10 minutes, so I welcome you to push back on that after this is over. And to give you a little context and a little insight, I'm going to be talking about big urban design ideas, and I really am a fan of big urban design ideas. And the context is that I came from a very small town in West Virginia, and I literally, while I was in design school, got a phone call from my mother who notified me in a very excited voice that they were getting a Kentucky Fried Chicken. So that was their version of a big addition to the city. So then I find myself in Portland, and it's a major scale change. Portland is really a place of big ideas, or as I'm going to posit, was a place of really big design urban ideas. And to define what a big urban design idea is, I just want to clarify that, and I'm going to start by saying that it's completely unrelated to scale and cost. That in my mind is not what constitutes a big idea. What really constitutes a big idea is the amount of public and political will that is required to get a project in place. And that number two, it's transformative, that the culture of a place, the identity of a place is changed by the addition of that work. And that it tends not to be incremental. It's not done at a piece at a time, but it really kind of comes in a big way. So if we illustrate that a little bit, this is a proposal by Walter Hood, rendered by Hugh Ferris, for how to deal with the growing population of Manhattan. And the idea behind that was to create a series of inhabited bridges. Each one of these bridges would have 60,000 inhabitants. They would have their own retail, they would have their own shops and schools, and even at the base, you can just make out the seaplane. Each one had its own little airport that was associated with it. That's a pretty big idea. Sometimes a big idea is a crazy idea, right? And this is one that really I find hilarious. The idea that as in Chicago, as they were building all the skyscrapers in the skyscraper age, right, that rather than a bus system, a train system, that we would have a series of airships or dirigibles that connect building to building. And if you go to Chicago, many of the tops of the buildings still have those receptors for dirigibles. Now, what gets crazy is Chicago is known as the Windy City, right? So we're going to include dirigibles in the Windy City. Where have we thought big? Let's move right close to home. And I got to say, the Lewis and Clark Exposition, it doesn't get much bigger than that. That there was a series of business leaders and politicians that said, we want to put ourselves on the map. We want to talk about these raw materials, namely wood products that we can share with the rest of the world. And they put on an exposition, and 1.6 million people came to that exposition. Now, that sounds relatively impressive, but again, if you put it in context, at the time, the population of Portland was 270,000 people. So 270,000 people brought in 1.6 million people. What is equally interesting to me is that that they had 6,000 people in Portland buy shares of stock to help pay for that event. So kind of roughly 2 in every 100 people that currently inhabited the city invested in that endeavor. And it was spectacular. They had countries that were bringing in their national treasures and showing them in Portland. Irreplaceable sculpture and paintings. States from all over the country came to kind of be represented here. And it was an amazing event, built in kind of our wetlands. I think we have to conclude the growth boundary as a big idea. A lot of political will there, and certainly transformative in all of that. We're feeling it now. It has shaped the culture and character of our city. And there might be folks that don't necessarily agree with everything that has kind of resulted from it, but it was a big move that involved a lot of political will, and to this day involves a lot of political will to make it continue to happen. And then another project that I would put in there is the idea that we would remove a freeway and put in a park. And again, this freeway, the conversations about the freeway removal was happening almost at the exact same time that in my home state of West Virginia, we were getting our first freeway, right? So that's how forward thinking it was, that we were in the process of doing away with them at the time when other parts of the country were deciding about putting them in. And that's the end result of making that move. Okay. So if you accept my premise that largely at this point in time, we're really kind of just fulfilling the vision of folks that came before us, and that we are not making really big urban design moves right now. What's getting in the way of those big urban design moves. And the first reason that I would say is that we currently lack champions. Now, talking about champions and showing Paris probably is a bad choice of slides, right? Because that's not so much a champion, right, as a dictator kind of taking over and transforming. So I thought as I talked about this, it would be better to show the Oregon coast, which was, again, champions deciding that that coast belonged to all of us and no one in particular. So that may be not a big Portland move, but it's certainly a lovely big move for those of us in Oregon. The reason that I think champions, we're having a hard time finding champions, is largely, it's been a long time, for example, since we've had a mayor that's been more than a one-term mayor. And to realize big vision, there's an issue of time that's necessary there. So in addition to somebody stepping up and willing to kind of put in some political capital to risk losing face, there's a time factor of taking on projects of that scale. The other thing that I would say that's working against us is there's a public state of mind, right? That is, as the public, we need to be able to embrace big projects. And one of the things that I would say is we're a little skittish right now. When I first moved to town, I remember there was a rug that was a rather expensive but beautiful rug that was put into one of the state buildings down in Salem. And the public outcry over that expenditure was enormous. We still haven't recovered from the Portland building competition. It's been a long time since we've had a really major design competition since then. It's as if one kind of mistake means that we can never kind of repeat those actions again. So we're a little skittish as the public about embracing really big ideas. Another one is that I think we're kind of getting content to let Voodoo Donuts and McMinimans kind of carry the branding for us right now. And the problem with that is those ideas aren't really big and we really don't own them and they can go away pretty quickly. But I fundamentally think that the biggest barrier between us and big urban design ideas is that we feel like we got it right and that we're done, that we finished, we did it. Good job, Portland's awesome. So we're kind of resting on our laurels, not really assuming that it can be better, that it can be more magnificent. So I really kind of feel like that academia, that's kind of our role, is to keep putting big ideas out there. And these are projects, the next couple are projects by our students, and this happens to be an idea about all that water quality infrastructure, that water infrastructure that was Portland's reservoirs. Let's bring in some geothermal farms and have some of the world's largest hot baths to endure winter throughout, right? Let's get the community out and engaging in those as opposed to kind of having them half filled just sitting there. Or worse yet, doing what Seattle did was filling them with earth and just putting a field on top of them. This was an idea about capping 405, which is not an old idea. Vera Katz was kind of behind this idea. And we cap I-405 and put much needed performing arts spaces and artist housing on top of I-405. That seems like that's a pretty good-sized idea. All right, these are fuzzy because they haven't yet happened yet because they're on their way. It's not quite Walter Hood's vision, but the Burnside Bridge looks like it probably isn't, and Rosemary probably can back me up, it's probably not going to withstand the next big one. So the county's reimagining it. And we can reimagine just a bridge as it is, but our students this spring will be reimagining that as an inhabited bridge to offset the costs of the construction of that bridge and to provide public amenities on that bridge. And if that one works, maybe we can think about additional crossings over the river. And it's not quite dirigibles, but in the fall we're going to be looking, using a studio to look at a complex network of tramways building on the OHSU tramway as a means of moving in the city. So here's the challenge to us all, right? If you're with me and you really feel like there's some room for some larger thinking in the city, I want you to act on that. And a good way to start on that is to reach out to us because we're really excited about making those big moves in the city and we'll help you get that started. Thank you very much.
Wow, right? Thank you, Rosemary, Alex, Greg, and Jeff, sharing your talent and your ideas, but mostly your drive. I'm always so excited about the drive that the people have who come to the 5x10's and who speak to us and share their ideas. So this gets better every year, and I'm saying that every year, so we can only keep moving. So please join us now, as many of your colleagues already did back there, for some speed education, followed by wine, talk, and visit with our vendors, who so graciously every year come back and make this event happen for us. Thank you so much.
Okay, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to this wonderful CSI Industry Forum. I'm standing here in the middle of the room. My name is Robert Hoffman. I'm the Executive Director of AIA Portland. We are partnering with our friends at CSI as usual, and we're really happy to be here. Speed education, hopefully you've done this before. If you haven't, I'm going to give you the overview. As long as you visit at least 5 of our vendor tables, which are the round tables around me, you can pick up 1.5 HSW education by remaining at that table and engaging for 10 minutes. We will then switch tables, which you will know when to do that, because I will play my conga drum. So let's give the vendors 5 minutes to get to those tables and get set up. If you're hanging around a table right now, a little round table, and you're not going to deliver speed education, you're going to need to relocate just a little bit. And once they're on their way setting up, I'll give you a few more details, so hang with us. So thanks for coming. Have a good time the rest of the night, and we'll see you next year.